So there's no major updates while I'm waiting for questions to come in. The mu strain, if you guys wondering, so it's one of the what's called the strain of interest. So it's been monitored closely. Doesn't appear to be very contagious or very dangerous. They worry though that it's the first strain that's sort of hypermutated, so that it can mutate faster. But there's no other kind of worry, and it's quite rare yet. It is in states, but like less than 1% of all the cases. And that's one. The second, yeah. So the boosters. So I'm going to say something positive and then something negative. Of course, everybody probably heard Biden yesterday. We're going to keep politics out of this. We always do. You can make up whatever you want to make up of his sort of a very aggressive push. But the issue with boosters are the safety has still not been completely kind of clarified, in my opinion. There's been several high level self-fires from the FDA. I don't know if you've heard. So the director of FDA and then another really high up person left because they felt that they were pressured by the Biden's administration to approve boosters ahead of real safety, But, I think they probably are going to end up being safe at the end of the day. And some of my patients already started getting them. You don't actually need any physician's order. Just walk into wherever you see the booster if you want to get one. And that's all I have. All right, so we have questions. Are immune compromised, thanks Benita, are immune compromised people getting a third shot and then a booster? No, a third shot is the booster. I think maybe what you're trying to refer is that there's an anticipation that we're going to have a Delta boosters in the future. That's not quite there yet. My sense from what I've listened to over the past couple of weeks, we're probably 4 to 6 months away from that. It takes a long time for them to redesign the vaccine. So plus, I think the incentive for that is not huge because patients with those who have been vaccinated and then they get breakthrough infection, chances of being very sick are pretty low. Okay, to cross from Pfizer to Moderna. Nobody knows. We just had a lecture about this yesterday at the Grand Rounds. There's just not enough data, although there are trials for all the crossovers. It's probably okay. I always was under, remember months ago, I mentioned that it may even be better. I'm now sort of at the position since the current recommendation, you just get the same exact booster of the same exact vaccine you've had before. Then the only difference is if you had Johnson & Johnson, well, then you kind of can choose either one, I guess. That's all I can say about that. I know it may not be satisfying answer, Elisa, but people in Arlington County are thinking that immune compromised people are getting 4 shots. No. Well, okay, let me back up. The immune compromised people may need a 4th shot because the thinking there is that the vaccine doesn't last for more than 4 to 5 months. So it's possible that there's going to be this never-ending boosters because the immune compromised patients tend to run out of the antibodies, so to speak, quickly. So I hope that's satisfactory. That's it? No more questions? Oh, Elizabeth wrote something. I read that if one had COVID early on and a year later got double vaccinated, one has super immunity. That is correct. That's my understanding too. And that's the data from Israeli study. So basically patients who had an early COVID, then had 2 vaccines, they seem to be the most protected by far. And it's way stronger protection than just getting the vaccines alone.
But when we had COVID, like in February of 2020, before anybody knew what it was in March, and we had like 16 out of 18 symptoms, but a doctor says, well, maybe it wasn't that, maybe it was something else. Is there any way to be sure?
Well, you can run all this comprehensive antibodies. It's not generally recommended because it's not really clear what to do if the tests come back negative. So you could have had an infection, you're now negative, it doesn't mean anything. Okay. So I wouldn't overthink that. Your question maybe, do I need a 3rd booster? That's not an easy question to answer, to be honest with you. Maybe we can, let me think about this for the next times, or I probably will need to ask some of my ID colleagues. It's a good question. Will somebody after live infection and then getting a standard vaccination, will they need another booster? I don't know.
Thank you.
Do you recommend compromise people who got, let's do just this 2 more questions and that's it, right? Because we're already short on time.
Yeah,
Do you recommend,
let's just do one question.
okay. Do you recommend compromise people who got J&J gets some other boosters? Well, there's no choice. You cannot get a second J&J. So you have to get either Moderna or Pfizer. So that's my understanding. Okay. When do you think Moderna booster will be approved? We'll talk about that next time. Okay. Kimberly and JD, take it away.
It's like a cliffhanger. It's like, tune in next week for more information. Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here with you all, and I appreciate the invitation. And I'm especially delighted that Kimberly is joining me. Kimberly is such a positive and has such a contagious energy, and I just smile every time I get to work with her or talk with her. And just thank you, Kimberly, for being here and joining me with it. So I'd like to start with maybe a little bit of background on what I do as the director of cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences, and how Kimberly and I came to cross paths. I direct the arts program at the National Academy of Sciences in DC, cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences. And in a nutshell, what that means is I'm interested in collaboration and integration between art and humanities and the STEM disciplines. So what kind of positive outcomes and impactful outcomes can happen when people work together outside of those established silos. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we witnessed a variety of creative ways that people were responding to the pandemic. And we started collecting creative responses through a questionnaire that we sent out to our network at the NAS. And we received stories of, that were collaborative and integrative and just creative people responding in a variety of ways. We received stories like a film industry production company who was working with hospitals to create pop-up hospitals. They had the facilities and the means by which to move quickly and create sites quickly. So they collaborated with hospitals. We had stories of engineers at JPL who kind of stopped working on spacecraft research and shifted to working with physicians because there was a shortage of parts that were needed for respiratory systems. And the JPL engineers basically helped engineer sort of temporary, simple respiratory systems to meet a need. So, those were the types of creative responses that we were getting. And we got a lot of responses like what you saw in the news back, if you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, communities coming together to try to not feel so isolated, finding ways through the internet, or, the people in Italy. And I just love that story of people in Italy going out at the same time every day and banging pots and pans over their balcony in unison, just to be reminded that they were still part of a community. And so, these were, the types of things that we were getting. And I reached out, I was introduced to Jill Sankey, who's the director of the Center for Art and Medicine at the University of Florida, and found out that they had been doing this type of thing too. They were very specifically focused around, their mission of looking at art and medicine, whereas mine was sort of more general creative responses from all disciplines. But Jill provided some great guidance in that, and I got drawn into conversations with her, and then introduced to other people that were working on very interesting projects down there. One of which is this wonderful Kimberlee Campbell-Smith, who's with me today, and we kind of grew out of that those conversations with Jill. And Kimberlee, maybe I should let you talk a little bit, and we can kind of come back and talk about some pragmatic outcomes from this.
Sure. Thank you, JD. Yes. And thank you for inviting me to hang out with you and your friends today. So as we're talking about Jill, if you ever hear her in her space. She is an amazing energy, an amazing person. And it's like, how does she do that? So who I am and how I got here is essentially, at my root and foundation, I'm a health educator and focused on well-being. I served in the military as a mental health specialist. I started life as a kid trying to help people live their best life, and exercise and movement and all these things were the way. But I just was a kid that thought, like, I don't want to be grown up. Grown-ups seem to be having miserable experiences. How do I help them be better, right? As I went through life and things and learning and what have you, I realized that if people's social and emotional well-being isn't intact, they're not going to do the physical things. As I continue to journey and discover myself and grow up and all that, I found the arts and theater. And as I'm leaning into that, I'm like, well, hold on. The same thing I did as a mental health specialist in the military is actually happening in theater on stage with the actors and the director and the audience, and like, it's happening. How come they're not doing it together? I was like, well, I guess I'll do that. And I'm leaving a lot of things out. But then I met Jill and I'm like, wait a minute, people are doing that. There's other artists that are working on health and well-being in the clinical setting. What JD is talking about, my foundation is in public health as a health educator. And so we look at population level health promotion. And the project that JD mentioned was a project we did, 2-year project called Creating Healthy Communities, Arts and Public Health. And as JD was saying, he was looking at COVID response and creativity. We had released at the beginning of lockdown, was also towards the end of our Creating Healthy Communities project. We created arts response to COVID-19, because just like you're talking about the people coming out and making sound to show connection, to show community, that's music, right? And so because we recognize that the arts has already been a part of well-being, or the beginning of people being people in any place, it was to come up with examples because the artists were doing it. Culture bearers were doing it. And so that's how we kind of started. So JD, I'll pass it back to you, my friend.
Yeah, I just put the website that Kimberly was talking about, the Creating Healthy Communities, as well as our archives from the creative responses in the chat, if anybody would like to take a look at those. And I think it's okay to kind of mention this, and Kimberly, you can cut me off if I'm going somewhere. One of the things, this is a little bit of an aside, but one of the things Jill just did is that she was on assignment at the CDC to help bring in art and culture bearers to help with vaccine compliance, confidence in taking vaccines through the arts. And that's something that is really pretty active conversation going on right now. And the CDC, with Jill's help, has actually put together a list of art practices and ways of going about this that sort of engage with the community. It actually, the CDC is very open to this, and the reason being, it has a history that goes back into the 80s with the AIDS crisis. Because what we saw during that time period was the gay community had a very specific sort of targeting graphics, posters, and things, sort of making safe sex sexy in a way and attractive. And it seems so obvious now that you would focus a message on a specific community. But the practice back then was it's a public health announcement. It goes out and you absorb it or you don't. And so that was very transformative. And the CDC sort of knew that, and they saw that. And I think they responded pretty quickly to this idea that the art and artists can be a very interesting way of engaging people. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue to have those conversations as well. You know, I think to kind of tie this back into this group, and somebody let me know if I'm going too long. I guess somebody's going to electrocute me or give me a buzz.
I'll
or
start
something.
talking and cut you off.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Kimberly, you do that. You know, to sort of tie it into this group, you know, sort of the idea of just, you know, looking at for a moment what it is. And we, of course, we could go on for days about this, but what it is that actually helps us think about art as a pathway to health, mindfulness, and well-being. And, you know, one thing that, you know, Kimberly and I both kind of talked about this before, this is not about, I mean, it can be about going to the Phillips collection. They have a meditation program. You go, you look at art, you go through a meditation process. And that's all well and good. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of looking at art, but the idea of movement, of creating art, whether if you're doing dance or even if you're just drawing, and that act of movement. One of the artists that we talked about that was part of our creative response, he went into a studio and he says so clearly, he said, I just went in there to keep sane. I had to paint in order to just keep from losing my mind from all of the, you know, the news and such. And it was, you know, it's just that simple sort of act of movement, and it can even just be drawing. So it's not about evaluating whether something is good. You hear this all the time. Well, I can't draw, so I'm not an artist, or what, you know, it's the ideal of movement. And it could be, you know, it could be dance, it could be drawing, it could be anything. We had worked with, I do this series called Days, or DC Art Science Evening Rendezvous. And earlier this year, we worked with a group called Studio KOS. And they started back in the 80s with Tim Rollins, who passed away a few years ago. But Tim basically found these sort of kids in marginalized communities in the Bronx in the 80s, which, you know, was basically on fire and being, you know, sort of destroyed and neglected. And, you know, these kids were struggling. And he found that they were incredibly creative, and he developed a way of teaching them through making art. He would read to them from the canon of literature and get them to you know, read as best they could at the time. And they would actually do drawings on the pages of the book. And then they would come together in an after-school collaborative. And, you know, keep in mind, these kids, he was told, don't try to teach them anything. By his principle, he said, don't try to teach these kids anything. They're unteachable. They've been kicked out of every other school in New York, and just try to keep them alive. You know, that was just, you know, such a dire message that he had. And through this collaborative and trying just the ideal that if you engage a student's hands in working through an ideal, you're going to engage their mind. And, you know, these kids, almost all of them went on to not only finish school, but to go on to full scholarships at major universities. And so even now, you know, some, you know, 30 years later, the original kids are still working under the title Studio KOS. And we do, I won't take time to put the link in there, I'll put it down later, but the recordings of those conversations with KOS are online, and I think really interesting. But Kimberly, do you have anything to add about this sort of ideal of what, you know, how do we bring this sort of creative healing and practice into our own lives?
Yes, thank you. And we have some really cool things happening in the chat too. So much to share, y'all. Okay, so what JD mentioned that I want to make sure to say before we leave is that what we tend to think when we hear arts is really more the industry, right? But creativity, things that happen really is just us. And what I found in my practice as a coach, educator, what have you, is when we are in distress, we forget what brings us to life. And usually what brings us to life is something in creativity, right? So for me, I gotta play music. I am not a musician, but doggone it, the experience of feeling and being around sound and music of where I grew up, like my little shirt, nickel bag of funk, it is funk, not other things, nickel bags of things. that brings me joy. So even wearing my short shirt, that reminds me of a time when, you know, my dad is, he's how old is my dad? 78, but he was a DJ when he was young and an athlete, right? And he doesn't have those things. And it's, you know, when I'm saying, Daddy, turn off the news, play some music. You forget that. But even friends that are do word work, people that cook, people that do hair, a creative practice, that thing that happens to you, that's why this is important. It's already connected to well-being. We're already doing it. Surgeons are already playing music. Women in labor are playing and doing creative practice, but we tend to forget it when we need it most. So during these times when we don't feel connected to each other and we don't know what's happening, I tell my clients and my colleagues, really, because it's hard work being a creative, helping other people and healing and stuff. We have to connect with ourselves. And what usually helps us connect with ourselves is some sort of creative practice. Not that you have to be a professional creative, but do something that brings you joy. And that happens to be this. And that's something that's been available forever. So there is a ton of information available if you want to dig into examples. I see the Philly, I went to school in Philadelphia, so this is awesome. I see the Philly Mural Arts Program was featured in our Creating Healthy Communities work and our white paper. So definitely look to some things.
I would also just add to that, you know, the KOS program.
Yes.
There's an artist in Philadelphia by the name of Ben Volta, who was one of the KOS participants, one of the students that came up through that. He's actually one of the teachers in Philadelphia now that is continuing this practice. So that ideal that he learned from Tim of engaging the kid and all the work that he does with the murals and everything, it involves communities. They're all involved in creating that together.
Yeah, and I will say the last thing to kind of close us out and then we can take questions is, this is not new. We didn't create this. This is more elevating the conversation around artists already doing this work. Artists have been doing public health promotion, well-being, healing, like I said, since community started, ancestral, like griots, all the things. Music is used for all sorts of things. It's just about remembering that it's here and it's available, and you can, even if it's like beating a beat on your whatever or doing things, it's available to you. That's it. Anything else, JD? We can take questions.
So I'm just actually, somebody was talking about this wonderful thing. I love the idea that an herbal garden helped pull
yes,
you through the
gardening
COVID.
is definitely a thing.
Yeah, I just put, there's an artist that we worked with, Juanli Carrión, who's a Spanish artist based in New York, who creates these amazing community gardens with the people in that community, and the shapes of the gardens and the types of things that they create usually are come from people's own sort of cultures and heritage. And then, you know, to cook those things together becomes a way of healing a community. So, I mean, you know, just the moment of playing in the dirt and how it just blows into conversations that are cultural and significant in so many different ways.
For sure. And we have integrative practitioners in our arts and medicine clinical practice. And some of them are also artists in residence that go bedside and do music, but then they do their practice. And then we also have gardening. We have a ton of things, y'all, like all this goes together, you know, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, and this is, you know, you just look at the chat and, you know, doing poetry, dusting off musical instruments, you guys get it. I guess what, you know, Kimberly, our message is own it.
We're just meeting new friends.
Own it and just, yeah, we're in the right place. But this is exactly the type of thing that we're doing. And I love the fact that, you know, what Kimberly's working at is the ideal of, you know, how do these become, you know, more engaged practices in the health profession. And,
For sure. And like I like to say, artists and creatives are not only entertaining and novel, but super useful, necessary, and integral in fostering the well-being of populations of people, individuals, and they deserve the respect. They deserve the honor of what they do.
Taking a look here to see if there's any other questions. I think
Yeah. We did good on our time, but if anybody has any questions to type in the chat, even though we are done, I'm sure we can probably answer them at some point. So don't stop. It is time for us to move forward.
I love the family cookbook. That's great. That's great.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, 'cause
thank you.
I just have to tell you that, you know, my family put together a cookbook back when I was younger, and one of my great aunts put her cake recipe in it, and everybody was devastated because it was like, you go to the store, you buy the Betty Crocker box of cake mix, and you follow directions. And they actually put that in the recipe book. I still think that's so fun.
I don't see the problem. I don't see the problem. That's what my cookbook's gonna look like.
Yeah, good.
The good people of Betty Crocker did the work. Why should I?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, everybody, I think we can agree that it was wonderful to have JD and Kimberly with us. We hope you'll stay for the practice that Josh is about to do. And we'll have to bring you back, because I think it'd be cool
Totally.
if we all
We
did
have to bring you
something
back.
for, you know, a wellness talk. You know, let's paint a painting. Let's try to do some poetry. Anyway, over to you, Josh.
All right, thank you. I'm so fascinated in what you're working on, because there's so many parallels between, you know, the work you're doing and what we're doing in nature and forest therapy. Because, you know, like with art, people have been going to nature, you know, since the beginning of time. That's where we came up from. And so, you know, within our work, we try to get people to slow down, much like doing an art project, engaging in that creativity, to get them out of that always getting to point B mentality of always having to move quickly through life. But anyway, thank you for sharing. I'm really looking forward to following up with the work that you're doing. And so, yeah, earlier they mentioned that my name is Josh Schwartz, and I'm a certified nature and forest therapy guide. And I lead nature immersions, or forest bathing, as some people call it, throughout Maryland, DC, and Virginia. And forest therapy, if you're not familiar with it, is a research-based framework for supporting health and wellness through immersions in natural environments. And, you know, for me, it's also a practice of remembering relationships, cultivating relationships with ourselves, with each other, the more than human world, and this moment in time. And so while a typical forest bathing session would last for 2 to 3 hours, and we would be outside engaging our senses, today I'm going to take you through a very shortened version of that experience. And yeah, so today we're going to be taking a short journey into a rainy late summer morning in Mount Mansfield State Forest, which is just northwest of Stowe, Vermont. And we're going to be exploring mostly with our eyes and our ears, as well as our heart and our imagination. And so to make this practice, you know, enhanced a little bit, if you happen to have headphones close by, if you want to use those, it can help block out some of the external noise. If you don't have any, that's okay too. It'll still be just as beneficial. And I just want to also note that part of this session, there's parts of this session today on screen. So as you're getting comfortable, as long as you can make sure that you have a good view of your screen. And, you know, I'd encourage you to get comfortable in any way that works for you, whether that's lying down, sitting on the floor, going outside, just whatever works. And so as we're settling in, I want everybody just to take a moment and check in with their bodies, you know, make sure we're all comfortable. You know, perhaps your body's asking for a little adjustment or a stretch or a wiggle, whatever that might be, just go ahead and indulge that. And if it feels comfortable for you, I would ask you to, or invite you to, either soften your gaze to the table in front of you, or close your eyes if that feels okay. And in just a moment, you're going to start noticing the sound of rain in a forest. Just as the rain is settling on the land, we too are arriving and settling in this present moment. Drawing a soft breath in through the nose, holding the breath for a second or two, and slowly exhaling as if you were blowing bubbles through a straw. We'll do this 3 or 4 times at your own pace. Now, settling back into normal breathing. No need to control the breath, just normal breathing. Experiencing what it feels like to take the air into your body and what it feels like to exhale. Noticing any sensations that may arise. Perhaps you're feeling the air hit the back of your throat. Perhaps the rising and falling of the belly. Perhaps there's a quality to the air or a change in temperature as you inhale and then exhale. Just noticing. And beginning to notice the way the air is on your skin. Noticing any warmth or coolness. The sensations of clothing touching skin, skin touching air. And bringing awareness to the points where your body is being supported by the floor, your chair. Maybe it's your sitting bones, or your feet, or both. What does it feel like to to be supported. And imagining roots growing out of these points of support, working their way down through your floor or floors until they reach the soil. And expanding into the soil, noticing how many different worlds your roots encounter. Feeling your way back up through the earth, through your floors, and back up into your body again. And as we enter back into our bodies, we'll begin a journey of sensory awareness throughout the body, moving through the different parts as they're named, simply noticing. So feeling into the space between your eyebrows, just noticing any sensations or awarenesses. And then moving to the center of your throat, to the right shoulder, to the right elbow, to the right wrist, to the right thumb and fingers, to the right wrist, to the right elbow, to the right shoulder, middle of the throat, left shoulder, left elbow, left wrist, left thumb and fingers, left wrist, left elbow, left shoulder, center of the throat, your heart center, to your navel, to the right hip, the right knee, the right ankle, right toes, right ankle, right knee, right hip, navel, left hip, left knee, left ankle, left toes, left ankle, left knee, left hip, navel, heart center, middle of your throat, point between your eyebrows. And now bring your attention to the ears, just inviting in what you are hearing. Maybe allowing the sounds to take you on a journey. If the mind drifts, as minds do, just coming back to the sound or to the breath. And in a moment, I'm going to invite you to open your eyes, but not quite yet. And when you do open your eyes, I just want you to spend some time noticing colors and shapes and patterns. And whenever you're ready, go ahead and slowly open your eyes or sharpen your gaze. And just notice what you're noticing. bringing our attention to motion, just spending some time exploring all of the motion that you can see. Bringing our attention to textures. Spend some time imagining what all of the textures must feel like. What it's like to touch the leaves, or to have the water run over your hands. Explore anything else that you feel like exploring through your sense of imaginal touch. And bringing our attention to detail. I wonder what the smallest thing is that you might notice. And as our session comes to a close today, I'd like to read you Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape, over the prairies and the deep trees and the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. All right, I want to thank everyone for joining as we transition back into the room. Leading people on nature therapy sessions is something I really am into. And if you're interested in doing a full session with me sometime, you can find me at agreenermind.com. I believe the link to my website was in the email that came out. And then if you're on social media, Instagram or Facebook, you can find me at agreenermind.com. But thanks again.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Josh. It was great. Right. Well, it's exactly 3 o'clock, everybody. Hope weekend goes well. We'll see you all next Friday. Enjoy the weather. It's pretty nice. Bye, everybody. And thanks, JD and Kimberly again. Thank you.
And Josh.
And Josh.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.